Hi there.
Hi. I didn't touch base with Tara last week, so not sure.
Yeah, she's usually crawling out of bed at this time, isn't she? So
yeah. Yeah, it looks like it's going to be a small group again this week.
hi, Tracy.
Hello. Hi, Terry. How's it going?
Yeah, good, thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, not bad. I was going to say I survived my first trip to the US and came back. And then just yesterday we got an email sort of saying someone at the event tested positive for COVID. So go get
Oh,
yourself.
no.
So I'm up to my third test for that one event at the moment. But yes, feeling symptom free. So cross fingers. It was someone I didn't interact with, like Linus Torvald. Wow. But yeah, otherwise good. It was a good meeting and really nice to see people in person again, despite all the craziness out there. Yeah. And yeah, I have a bit of an update from that meeting as well, but maybe we'll give another minute or two. Do you know if Tara's joining, Nicola?
I did not
Here
touch
she is.
base with Tara last week.
Okay, someone Tara.
Oh, there we go. Speak of the devil.
Yes. But how's everybody? You all good?
Doing all right. It's getting colder over here. I mean, I'm sure it's similar in Ottawa.
Yeah, definitely had a few flurries on the ground today.
And I wish we could just get rid of DST.
Oh, agreed. I hate the time shifts. The time shifts are terrible.
Hey, Tara.
Hey, good morning. Sorry I overslept. So here, I'm joining you from my kitchen while I make my coffee.
Sounds good. So, yeah, I'm happy to go first. Just a bit of an update. So last week we had a face-to-face meeting with some board members and a couple of members from CDF. So we had a specific strategy session on the Monday, and part of it was just kind of looking to 3 years ahead for the CDF. What are some of the most strategic things we should be focused on? So we did a bit of a brainstorm, went around the table and asked everybody what they thought were the key focus areas or the difference CDF could make. And then we distilled that down to common areas and tried to get some consensus. And pretty much we were able to focus on deeper discussions in 3 areas, and best practices emerged as one area that there was general consensus that folks felt it was really key to CDF to have this dynamic body of work that does evolve and does speak to best and emerging practices. So we presented the deck you put together again, Nicola, because it turned out, even though we have shown it to the strategy call, a lot of people hadn't seen it or hadn't acknowledged it. But in general, the feedback was just that it's great. People love the way it breaks down the different perspectives, and it shows an acknowledgement of what's needed at different stages. So long story short, folks were generally supportive, and the discussion was like, how do we support this effort and how do we get it to the next stage? And that's something we want to have follow-up discussions, because it feels like people don't necessarily know how to engage, or just telling them to come along to this meeting isn't quite working. So maybe it is this idea we get to kind of the MVP and then it becomes clearer, or, you know, how do we accelerate perhaps getting to that first version where with a contributor guide, so we can move the conversations around, you know, just make it a bit more concrete. And the other discussion, there was a suggestion as well that we should brand it very strongly. So give it a specific name or something a bit more sticky, so it has a way of referencing it that people can latch on to. And I don't know, anything we can do to brand it and make it a thing. So we just refer to, you know, not CDF Best Practices, but whatever I'm not going to make up names now, but if that makes sense, of just having some strong branding around it. So it's a thing and people refer to that as a specific thing. Yeah, so basically all good. And my job is just to figure out how to move that forward and how to connect the right people here. So I'll leave it there. Any questions or thoughts related to that?
The branding is an interesting idea. The first thing that comes to mind, though, is that there's like, you know, branding that you do because it is work we've created, versus branding, like, versus what we're actually doing, which is we're not creating work as so much as we're curating it. Mm-hmm. And so I just want to make sure that we avoid inadvertently some form of broader authorship around some of these concepts. Like, we're pulling heavily from Accelerate and State of Devops, right? Mm-hmm. We're pulling heavily from other sources. So I want to make sure we're very careful about how we approach that. Mm-hmm. Because the last thing we want to do is make people feel that we want to encourage people to participate and bring their ideas for consideration. And as we build up this body of work, we don't want them to feel like, oh, well, now it's, you know, copyrighted CDF or whatever. Not that, of course, that we would do that, but I'm just saying that the approach has to be very thoughtful.
Yeah, and I think we've, you know, rubbed people up the wrong way previously with some of that stuff. So we do need to be very careful, especially with the sources that we're using. So you know, we need to make sure that we've got clear references where we're, you know, directly pulling from sources, and that we're crediting people, and, you know, generally making it appear as open and above board as it is.
And honestly, I think we could turn that as a strength, right? With treating it like proper research with citations and also, you know, as a way of maintaining that balance that we talked about before, which is to really make this be the neutral content, and using like, hey, this is, you know, you're trying to bring marketing stuff into this space. Show your work, you know, where's your research that shows that this is the best practice, that kind of stuff. So I think we could have a really interesting approach to it.
Yeah, I like that. And I think our strength as kind of the vendor neutral body is where we focus on. Like, we're just bringing everybody together and making it clear how everybody can contribute, and everything is led by principles, not by anything else. Principles, research.
Just going to say +1 for references. I think they're great for people who are essentially end users of the stock, because it enables them to go deeper when they need to. And then implicitly really helps encourage contributions, because people know that when they contribute, you know, their name and their work will be on it. And it's kind of a version of self-promotion, but it's good.
Okay. So, Nicola, I don't know, I missed last week. I don't know if there was an update
Yeah,
or
I
something to
didn't
reiterate.
really have. Yeah, I didn't have a ton of updates last week. Not really much anything. I did have Doxy. I did get Doxy running locally on a VM. If you want, I can share my screen and kind of show a very, very, very rough skeleton of how it's
Yeah.
working so far.
Go for it.
All right. And once again, I don't do Zoom, so I have to figure out where this is. Do you need to allow me to share screen or anything? I'm trying to find it.
No, it should be anybody
Right, where
can
the hell
share.
is it?
There should be
Zoom
it's green.
settings.
It should be a
Oh,
green
that
button in the
thing.
main.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right in front of my face. Yeah. All right, there we go.
If you're used to Google Meet, yeah, Zoom is weird.
Porridge temperature assessment. Very
Too.
intrigued by porridge temperature assessment.
Okay, sorry about that. I have to remember to not turn on the audio thing. All right. There we go. Now you can hear me, right? Okay, ignore the ugly colors and stuff and placeholder everything. So there was an example site basically, and it's themed around Goldilocks. So you'll see lots of like weird placeholders. The idea here, and ignore the ugly colors, I removed the picture of porridge and suddenly this thing's now this orangey brown. But the idea here is that we have some basic navigation. So here we can kind of have, what is this site about basically, and that we have these sections here, and we have a place where you can learn about the vendor neutral stuff. We have a community where we have more specific implementations that you can look at. And then last week, I think we had also talked about having, some specific resources around things like, Accelerate, some of the other books that are in progress and coming out. So that could be a sort of centralized place here. The Learn area then will have some of these sections that we have in our draft docs. So like the version control. This section here would be, again, placeholder, but the idea here is we would talk about, if you're looking at organizational maturity, we have this stuff in terms of DORA, and you can go and assess your maturity and what areas you might want to look at, then come back here. It can also reference, for example, from a security perspective, the emerging SALSA framework for looking at supply chain security, which is really relevant in this continuous delivery space. And any sort of other assessment tools that we think might be relevant could go here, and then we can provide some guidance about what sections you might want to look at based on the results of those assessments. And then, yeah, I've put in some placeholders for these various, some of them are not in order because I'm still contents, but you can see I had there's some stuff I had mentioned in my slide deck, maybe some stuff around team culture.
Yeah.
The other thing I saw that I really feel like kind of spans a lot of these areas, and I'm not sure how we want to address it, whether it's in specific sections or we have a dedicated section, but is things like feedback and measurement and observability and all that kind of stuff. We don't really have, in one sense, it's nice to have a section on that because people say, how do you measure if you're successful?
Yep.
And on the other hand, you kind of instrument a lot of that as part of setting up, say, continuous testing or continuous integration, right?
So I do think we have referenced that in the doc, but maybe we haven't put it. I don't recall if it's under a specific section, but I do know we've had a lot of discussions about measuring DevOps success and conversations around that.
So in the practice doc, we kind of have this consistent why, definition, description, scope, best practices. And then some stuff like a specific case study with tools and stuff. And I guess maybe if we have some kind of specific heading around
measuring success,
measurement or feedback or something like that, and not even necessarily success, but measuring performance. Yeah.
And interestingly enough, on the other part of CDF with the landscape, we were having these discussions about landscape categories, and I know Kara's actively trying to figure out how to represent those, and the words are measurement, metrics, and all the way down to observability and feedback. So just trying to position that in things which overlap a lot into black and white categories is definitely interesting.
Ever since I was introduced to the landscape for CDF, I have struggled to understand, like, how can you create categorizations in something that has so many shifting overlaps?
It does.
It's just,
you definitely have to make calls that everybody's not happy with, but
it's definitely complicated. But one of the ideas, one of the ways in which I think about this is really like a long chain of checking for sort of quality, all the way from DORA metrics to testing to, looking at your pipeline to observability when in production. And are you thinking for the best practices docs, however we call them, are you thinking of having them all together, or are you breaking them into separate categories?
So we have the one big giant doc, and most of these categories like version control, CI/CD, testing, so on, are sections within that doc.
Right.
So I am basing these placeholders on that, and then there are a couple extra things that I thought I wanted to discuss, things like team culture, things like feedback and measurement, where that really is something that you might, from an implementation perspective, it could fall in any of the sections. And arguably we have a section for security, but arguably that's something that you should be incorporating into everything.
Yeah. Okay, so you're keeping observability and testing quite separate then?
I think there's testing. I don't think we have observability. That's almost, we never
correct.
covered that, as that's after you deliver observability is the kind of operate state. So we don't have a section on observability. I believe that was conscious, but I could be wrong.
And that might be the scope we set, right? And we're just explicit about that and say, we are focusing on continuous delivery. Here are some resources you can look at that talk about that domain, but this is the scope of what we cover, but we just want to be clear about that.
Yeah. And I think we have, I don't know if it's in this group or elsewhere, it's the Netflix model. They talk about develop, deliver, operate. And so we ignore the develop. We don't talk about architecting. We don't talk about IDs. And we, to a certain extent, the observe, we don't talk about observability. We don't talk about site reliability engineering as much, but lots of people intertwine them. So we might have to be more explicit if that's out of scope or not. Yeah.
And that's where we'd have to tie in things with the assessment as well, right? Because if you go over to DORA, it does cover the gamut. And so if what you're missing are things like instrumenting observability, we might come back here and say, okay, look at your results, and this is the stuff we cover here. And if you're looking at things like observability, there is some more deep dive into that somewhere else, right?
Yeah.
So I'm a little bit worried that we might be looping back around to where we came in, because we're talking about a lot of things which are really trying to break down continuous delivery into a hierarchical model that fits into a website. Mm-hmm. And that has some problems associated with it, because it makes it look like there are bits of the process that are optional and you can pick and choose what you want. And it also presupposes an engineering audience. And where we got to previously was that if the most of the communication that we actually need to do is not really with the engineering teams. So we need to make sure that we're structuring this in such a way that we're presenting it for different audiences, and it's easy as soon as you come into the landing page to be able to pick a path through the information that is speaking to your concerns, rather than potentially bamboozling you with a whole bunch of technical terminology you don't care about. So that's, I think that's important that we think about that again, and how we can get that journey. In this example, if I've come to the site because my concerns are all about the neighborhood home invasion problem, then getting a detailed picture of the bear's tax position is not what I want to see.
Yeah. So Nicola, just going back to your about page, before you came into the section you showed us, so there's the landing page, like the front page, and then you had was it about?
Yeah.
And
this would kind of be 10,000 foot view.
Yeah, it feels like a lot of the tying everything together for me would fit there, or there should be something there that's the very high level. Do you care about business goals, or are you trying to build a thing, or are you both, or something that ties that picture together that then maybe pulls you, I don't know, directly to the assessment, which
that might be so another thing is, this structure tends to be very hierarchical and people could come in from anywhere. And so a possibility is that we do have sections for things like metrics and measurement. And we have a page that kind of talks about the large picture of it, and we may not get into details about things about observability, but we can link into various places that might cover some areas of that throughout the docs. Like, not everything has to be linear and hierarchical in terms of how we build this out. So some of these sections might not have a lot of prescriptive content, but for example, something like security, it really is sort of this horizontal thing that goes across. So it would be an example of, I'm coming in and I'm responsible for, say, compliance within my organization. And might be interested specifically in the security stuff. So we come into the security, and the security might actually point into some of the best practices within testing, for example.
Yeah. So there's overlap.
That might be how we handle some of these sort of horizontal kinds of things. So even though we might have these detail sections in the best practice docs that cover things like CI and CD, maybe we have some sections here. Maybe we even have maybe we have some sections at the top level. I don't know how we want to do this, but that cover some of these things that are broader and more spanning.
Let me say this a different way. This weekend's Twitter topic has been how everybody is doing DevOps as an anti-pattern by setting up a DevOps team.
I've seen that.
You saw my tweet there, right?
we seem to be effectively writing this in a way that implies that step number one, set up a DevOps team, and then this is what they do. And what I'm saying is, how do we do the important piece, which is to say, this is how you need to change your organization and the way in which you commercialize your products so that this tool is actually valuable to you. And then these are the roles that various people in your organization will have to take on. And then below that, we can talk about the details of the tasks that need to be fulfilled in those roles.
So it sounds like, Terry, maybe we need to sketch out the user journey, like you would for any tool, or like what's the user journey through the docs, and maybe we need a couple of those, or I'm thinking at least 3, where we have the these are the different personas, here's how they engage, what are the steps they're taking. And then that will probably help us figure out the gaps or how to organize this independently.
So the, can you hear me? Is this coming through?
Yeah.
Yep.
Hello. Oh, okay, good.
Yes.
Sorry. So, I just now have the coffee. So I know that there was some concept of this discussion previously, but I kind of want to dig in on what Terry was saying a little bit, because I think there's two aspects to it. There's here is what it means in order to have high performance, if we're going to use the accelerate language, right? Here are the capabilities that you have enabled, right? Here are the philosophical approaches that are necessary in order to enable this. Here are examples of the mechanics of it, right? And this goes back to what I was saying about the landscape, is that being able to like break things out into categories really trips over the idea of continuous delivery as this ongoing cycle. It's a loop, and it's not even a single loop. It's like a spring, right? It's overlapping loops. And that's where I think the prescriptiveness, if it's going to enter anywhere, like I'd love to see it start at that concept, which is this is a whole different way of thinking, right? And you need to really kind of open yourself as an executive or as a technical leader to this approach. And I know that we're like trying to not make the scope too broad, and I completely respect that. So, we want to incorporate elements of security. We want to incorporate elements of observability as it pertains to continuous delivery. So we need to figure out what that sweet spot is, and then have the redirects, right? And this is where, Tracy, I think, I keep coming back to how can we build these interesting bridges, for example, with open telemetry, right? Where it's like, okay, if you really want to dig here, there's a redirect. From their side, it's like, if you really want to understand the CD stuff, the redirect comes from that direction. Because I don't think we can completely not talk about it, right? Elements of the continuous delivery workflow will be based on, if you're doing it right, the structured reactions to what's happening, triggering things in your pipeline. So like the whole idea of a Canary deployment, how do you know whether or not the Canary is still alive? Well, because of the instrumentation that you have in production that tells you that things are going well, right? So, and in order for that knowledge to occur, then you have to have some form of observability in place, right? So that's, so I think there's, and Nicola kind of kicked me virtually if I'm saying this wrong, but like there's this element of navigation, like at any point of this journey, like as you're in this site, there should be an easy way to go to related concepts, right? I don't know if that's a left nav thing or a tagging thing, right? What the best way to do that was. But I think that the overall sort of organizational or persona structure, however you want to describe it, needs to be pervasive, because it's the spring loop of overlapping identity. So it's like, not even do we not want this to be linear. I don't think it can be and be successful. Does that make sense? I feel like I'm blathering here a little bit.
I completely agree with that. When people, like, most of the time when people come to docs, it's because they went to a search engine and typed a query and landed in somebody's documentation. And even Google's documentation, they aren't necessarily searching within our doc sets. They're often coming from a search, and that means they are landing anywhere. And that's when they might become aware of how our table of contents are organized. So it's an organizing structure. It helps people to kind of see how we've thought about how these things are related. But I completely agree that within some of the pages that we make call outs to, why are we doing this particular instrumentation as part of continuous integration? Because we want to be able to look at it later so that we have feedback. And that we do then have these call outs. Why are we being careful about how we use third-party repos? Because we want to be concerned about security. So integrating some of that stuff and not necessarily deep diving in those places, but then pointing out when we need to.
And maybe we need a slightly clearer problem statement for this whole piece of work. Because if we think about it, best practices means different things to different people.
Yep.
But in practice, I don't think that the organizations who are already doing continuous delivery well are going to immediately come to this resource to use it as a metric by which to score themselves, because they already know this stuff, they understand it, and they're running it to a high standard. They're getting the feedback. So that means our real audience is the people who have yet to successfully adopt that.
Yeah.
And if they haven't already adopted it, it's because there is a problem in their understanding the value or the model. And probably the reality of that situation is that you're looking at an organization that has, an organizational process that they built under Prince 2 in about 1995. And they're approaching the problem saying, we want our Prince 2 waterfall process to go faster. Therefore, how can we take what we're already doing, call it Devops, and get a silver bullet that will speed us up? And of course, that's a real challenge, because that's never going to work, and they need to know that up front. Otherwise, we go into this cycle of people saying they're doing DevOps, but they're never actually doing any of the continuous delivery processes, and then failing, and then having DevOps become a banned word because it didn't work, and therefore you're not allowed to speak for it again.
Yeah, so I agree with that. I do think we articulated the problem statement well, and I think we need to go back to it, because I remember that table from your presentation, Nicola. We could almost take that, and we have the, do I buy into CD? And for that one, it was, yes, I do. And then the journey was, how do I share what I'm doing? And I think, so I think the site is good. It's a good start, and we just need to keep checking back with our original goals and figuring out, like, this is the piece for the people who don't know anything, but we haven't done the pieces yet, or we haven't structured it for the people who do. So not this deck, but the one you had shared.
I'd also argue, Terry, at some point, if we get to the point where we have attestations because you want to bring your project in, all Screwdriver or Shipwright or whatever, it's like people hold up like, does it meet these criteria? That would be awesome. That would be a great problem to have.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I think I had presented this
it's
when I first did the pitch deck.
Not this deck. I can bring it up. So when you said it,
this is a different deck.
Okay.
But some of these, the point of this deck is that there are a lot of these buzzwords here that we are familiar with if we're in the software development space, and a lot of executives don't care about their buzzwords. What they're looking for is, they want to be able to build things, they want things to go faster. The way you get there is, Dora helps you measure how you're doing and to get these 4 metrics. And that it isn't a magical, you get from A to B by implementing everything all at once, because everybody's journey is going to be different. So, you can blow it up, you can let it rot, but what's being proposed here is that you look at what you need, which is going to be different for every team, every organization, and you fix that thing. And that's where some of this assessment comes from. And so the argument, or the sort of thing, the approach I wanted to try to take maybe is trying to look at it from this perspective, that you're going to look for what it is that's not working, and maybe you've already identified that, or maybe you need to do some of this value stream mapping stuff. And this is what, I mean, this deck is pitching Dora, but the idea is that you're coming here with a problem. And so they run through an example here. I think this is we want things to go faster problem, and then walk through that. But the idea is that oh, did you like that infrastructure? Yeah. So the idea there, though, is that
and then the next one
Dora,
was great, and it made me.
Yeah.
Is that where all the constraints
That's
are?
Terry's. Yeah. I think that
Anyway.
This is the picture of what Terry was talking about. I don't want to change much, but
Yeah. So, it's this incremental thing rather than trying to fix all the things, right? But the point is that the idea is you might be coming and you might already know that what you want is to make things go faster, but what is it that you want to make go faster, right? And trying to walk people through, don't try to boil the ocean. Okay, so you want to make things go faster. To make things go faster, what part of it do we need to make go faster? Here's a way you can assess what might be causing your bottleneck and the reason why things aren't going faster, or at least the top reason why things aren't going faster. Fix that first. And so that's one way we can pitch it, but that's kind of what I had in mind. We don't have this written up in our best practice doc, but kind of coming at it, from this angle rather than saying, come here and start reading from the top and work your way down, right?
So let me just flag one thing, which is that if your organization is technically led, then this style of pitch works to communicate that problem. But for organizations where everybody above a project team is non-technical, then you've got a much bigger communication problem, which is how do you explain the organizational and process change that's needed to drive continuous delivery, and get buy-in for that at an executive level, and funding and the push to reorganize potentially large bits of a company in order to then enable the technical delivery teams to do their part. And I think the challenge that we have is that if we jump too quickly into the technical nuances of continuous integration with that audience, they'll immediately switch off and they won't get the message. So we need to be able to communicate the cyclical continuous delivery process in business language, because that's actually our target market for this information.
I like the and I think I'm having some sound problems. I may be coming on a delay, but I like what Tracy was saying earlier around what was Tracy saying? But the workflows, right? So if we can say, here are those concepts, here are the benefits that you get, here's how you got that benefit, right? With some concrete examples, and basically extract some of the data from Dora and then hopefully get more data from partner teams within member teams within CDF. We could try to fill out and have it be a data-driven discussion. Like, here are some key examples of what you're talking about, Terry, and basically have them as like white paper or whatever the appropriate forum is. And like, okay, now that we have your interest, go get your tech team and unleash them, and here's the directions that they can go, right?
Yeah.
But I do believe it is sort of from that perspective, from a top-down approach, this is top-down information flow, right? That hopefully will result in them buying into the idea, which will open up the rest of the options for engagement.
And I think, a lot of what we see as that continuous delivery process is effectively an extension of objectives and key results as a business methodology, but just turned into technical and automatable process. But the challenge that we have is that, OKRs are really not well known in business outside of Silicon Valley. So if we're trying to communicate a way of optimizing a business process, but our audience don't actually know what the business process was, so they're trying to hang these concepts onto a completely different business process that they do understand, and that's where it all breaks down.
Right. So
I wanted to share a couple of
these
things
types of content engagements.
just because I
Go
do
ahead.
agree, but I do. So someone shared this with me, that's minimum viable CD. And it's a few folks, I think Dave Farley and folks, and they've put down, you know, kind of headers and things. And then when I see that, and it looks like we're trying to build something similar, but it doesn't, like seeing that again, it's a list of things, but without this business reason tying it together. So it feels like maybe that's what we're on track to do the same of, or more of the same of.
So the thing that we keep hitting, and it's here again, it says CD is the engineering discipline of delivering. No, it isn't. Continuous delivery is a business methodology for delivering products, okay? And a part of that is in using the engineering capability to automate and accelerate that process. But it's definitely an anti-pattern to consider continuous delivery as an engineering problem. You cannot do continuous delivery driven from engineering. You can only successfully do it if it's driven from the top of the organization, and everything is structured on that model.
So going back to what I consider our problem statements, where we have these different personas and we're building towards that, it does feel like we have this question, but we don't specify whether that's the engineering perspective or whether that's the business or both. And so maybe we do need just to reevaluate these and come back in, because like what I feel Nicola has put there does definitely cover some of the cases. Maybe I want to adopt CD, and then what are the best practices for certain things, but there's a lot more we've scoped this as, which we need to consider as well. And as I say, maybe just draw out the journeys, which is independent of what if I think it's important what Nicola puts together, we get it to a place we can share and iterate and maybe prototype around.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
it's almost it's a user story problem, really.
Yeah.
It's, you know, as CEO, I need to, you know, and as product manager, I need to. It's answering those questions that that defines the structure of the information that we need to get across.
So yeah, maybe we can take a bash at that. And just the other thing to add as another dimension, we have a new rep for CDF from eBay, and it's someone called Justin Abrams. And it's really interesting because he, more than anyone I've met in the community, is working with an end user company, but not so much on the engineering side, but more on, he's trying to help the teams work out what they should be doing and connect that to leadership. And so he was interested in putting together an assessment, like he wants an assessment across eBay where they assess themselves so they know for all the different teams we have, what should each team be doing. So maybe he might be a great person to bring into this conversation, and he might be like one of the people who has that specific perspective of, would this be useful? What do you need to have those conversations with leadership about what each team should be doing and how they should be dealing with the constraints. So I might suggest, like, A, I think we should capture those user stories, but B, maybe we can get him in as someone who embodies, I think, the user story Terry's trying to make sure we focus on.
Sounds good.
So I'll reach out and see if he can make this time, or we can set up something specific at a time that works for him.
That
I'll
sounds
just
really
add to
good.
that and say
I know that. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Nicola.
I was just going to say that table that Tracy was sharing. I mean, a lot of that was stuff that Jan and I had put together, and some guesses around what people would be coming in looking for. But that was the reason we had been kind of probing for some user personas and like what are the top couple of things that they're asking, so that if there's something like I want to know how to address a bottleneck, or I want to know how to make sure my company is compliant and can maintain compliance or whatever, then we can figure out how to address those things.
So I think it might help also to have a look at some of the views that external organizations, non-technical organizations have on this perspective. And the best way to do that is go and have a look at some job adverts for DevOps developers in finance, say, because what you'll get is senior DevOps developer, and then must have project estimation skills, experience with Gantt charts, and you'll get a long list of waterfall processes that they need to be compliant with in their DevOps activities. So there's a big communication problem out there right now that DevOps is a magic wand, but everybody has a completely different view of what DevOps actually is. And there's massive miscommunication going on outside of a very small number of organizations that get the process because it matches their organizational process at a business level.
Cara, did you have something you were going to add?
Yes, but it's a bit of a reversal to what you were saying, Tracy, about Justin Abrams. So it's kind of skipping over Terry's very good comment right now, but I guess we'll get back to that. From my understanding of his, what he was describing, what he was doing at eBay, they are using the DORA metrics widely, but what he would like to create internally and maybe bring to the public, in open source, is something that sounded a lot more like the SALSA framework, like something really very clear cut. You're at level 0 if you do these, you're at level 1, you're at level 2, and sort of almost like a maturity model or some way of thinking of it that way. And we did speak about how previous DORA research has suggested, as you were saying, Nicola, where you have like a set of capabilities, and as teams, you look at where your bottlenecks are and you move forward there on a choose your own adventure type way. So it's kind of two different approaches. And I'm just asking out of curiosity, like, how do we feel about that? Do we feel that both are useful? Do we feel like more one is useful? Like, how are we thinking?
I think it's not a bad idea. That's useful within organizations who are trying to improve their capability in a space. But we have to be careful of the presupposition, which is that there is an incremental path to continuous delivery, and that all organizations can be scored on that path. In reality, it's much more like there's a switch and your organization is capable of DevOps and should be doing DevOps, and your organization is not capable of DevOps or should not be doing DevOps. And it's only when you enter the first path that you then should be starting to measure yourself against a maturity curve. Because there are a lot of organizations that really shouldn't be going on this journey in the first place, because they won't be able to restructure in a way that will enable them to see the gains from it. And so it's how you build that in as well. Otherwise, you get into this problem where people make the assumption that they can take any organization down that maturity path, and then they get frustrated and stuck in the early stages because they can't move forwards.
Okay.
So what prevents an organization going down the DevOps path? What kind of things would they?
Well, if you have a very rigid business process, which, for example, requires large amounts of legal sign-off on every change, then that's always going to prevent you from accelerating your release cycle. You won't be able to gain any of the real benefits of this cyclical process. And there are going to be some big ones in here. So, for example, if you're delivering machine learning applications to European customers, every time you do a release, you're going to have to get a third party to come in and assess your code base for legislative compliance. So that will probably be a 6 to 12 month process for every release. So, you aren't going to be able to do DevOps in that environment.
I think that comes back to what is the definition of DevOps, though, because if you look at something like the DORA capabilities, things like processes that are very bureaucratic and heavy are, the opposite of that is one of the capabilities is that you have more lightweight process and you have the process where you need it and you don't have the process where you don't. So we can still point to some of those things and say maybe that's where you need to start some of your journey, right?
Yeah, but we've got to do is we've got to make sure that people understand that there are certain things that would absolutely prevent them from gaining any benefits from this process.
Absolutely. Yeah.
If they're an organization that falls into that category, really they would be wasting their time in trying to invest in this because it's not ever going to deliver what it promises to other organizations.
Okay, let's pause it there. So, Nicola, with the framework, I do think it's useful to keep to have that or to use that as a place to iterate on the concrete, because I do feel like at the end of the day we do need to turn this into something concrete and get the feedback and make it more useful. So do you have a path to even sharing that, or like a place I could go in and prototype something which I think might address some of Cherry's things, but I want it to be concrete because I think until it's concrete,
Yeah.
you can't get. So what's your comfort level with evolving and sharing that?
If we're not in a huge rush, what I would like to do is take the weekend when the US is on their Thanksgiving, because that's usually a nice quiet week. And I want to use like 1 or 2 days that week to kind of clean this up a little so that we don't have as much of this random Goldilocks placeholder text, and then put that in GitHub. I also haven't deployed it externally. There's a product called Netify that a lot of products use to just kind of deploy. Okay. So I want to work on setting some of that up. So I want to take a few days that week maybe to set something up that's a little cleaner than what I've shared here, and then maybe put that into GitHub and we can kind of iterate from there. That's my thought. I guess the other thought is, if we're looking at maybe accelerating things, I don't know if any of the other other members have tech writers or anybody else who was interested in contributing, or if whether that would help speed things up or not.
Yeah, I can start those conversations.
Sorry. What I was hoping is, I think is once we get the repo up and we get it set up, and like, okay, here's the thing, and that will make it a little bit more an easier sell, hopefully, to get contributors.
Yeah,
that's fair. Yeah,
but
so I'm aiming for.
Yeah, that timeline sounds good. I just realized I would be here. I'm taking a few days around US Thanksgiving off, so I'm not around on the 29th.
Yeah, well, my goal is to have that in a place where I can then check it in, and then once we hit the end of November, then to hopefully have that all available in the GitHub repo that you've set up.
Yeah. And Terry, maybe we can capture the user story of the CEO in a format that works for that table, because I know we stuck the personas on at the end of the deck, but I think making sure we explicitly cover the questions they're asking, or just
Yeah, it
dive into that.
might be worth us doing one of those sort of user story exercises where we just put on the hat of each of the key people involved,
Yeah.
and then capture a list of what are their concerns, what are they interested in, and then just keep that as a reference document to say, look, these are the questions we're actually trying to answer with this piece of work.
Yeah.
And then we can come back to it and say, right, have we answered all of those questions for each of those audience members?
Yeah, I think that sounds good, and happy to help with that.
Yeah, and maybe we do that as a session next time. Maybe we just run through that in the next meeting and do it as a game.
I like that. So I might not be around for the next one, but I'll try and scribble down some thoughts, or if there's a doc, contribute. Right. Anything else? Awesome. Yeah, let's leave it there. But good discussion, everybody.
Awesome. All right. And I think Nicola Jan is going to be back from Germany soon. So hopefully we can.
Yay. Cool.
At least I think so. So we can get her in.
Yeah.
And get more writers. Well, maybe we could. This will be a good talk for Write the Docs one day.
Yes.
Awesome.
All right.
All
Thanks,
right.
everybody.
Cheers.
Bye.